Um, for people who are on smaller devices, a couple of things to make this a little easier. In the chat, I have the links to the 2 documents that I'm going to talk about tonight. And because we only have an hour, I'm going to run through these as highlights so that you can go look at these at the 2 documents I'm going to work with later. They're written to be sort of a basic guide for anybody to be able to just pick up and walk through them. And I want everybody to keep in mind that these are living documents. They're meant to be updated regularly. These are not set in stone. Things in the SCA change over time, laws change over time. I mean, all kinds of things change around event stewarding, not usually in large amounts all at once, but something will change every year or so. And so this document gets updated regularly. So the links that I put in the chat will always go to the most updated version of this document. So my recommendation would be you keep the links and don't necessarily download the document and use that forever. If you need a printout or you need a copy on your own, if you need the reference, the next thing is I'm going to address a little bit of the dragon in the room. Right now, we can't have any physical events. So my intention for the first part of this is to show you the outline of how to set up events, a lot of the ways to make it easier, some of the things for planning, with the intention that these are things that you can use in the future. The second document that I have is the Online Event Stewards Guide, and this is brand new. And this is also a living document that's meant to be updated by us, the community, and I expect this one to be updated a lot in the coming years. And this one is more about online events and things to think about and things that you can try out, because right now we have fewer rules around online events than we do around physical events for obvious reasons. So with that, and somebody asked earlier, and I want to make sure that everybody hears this, right now On-Tier has no physical events until the end of July, and the West has already expanded that into the end of August. So it's likely On-Tier will also extend into the end of August. Those decisions are being made as events change, and we all know how much they're changing right now. So think about these as things to do in the future and all the planning you can do now that makes things fun and easy when we do get together again. So here's the first one. This is the Event Stewards 101 guide. So I'm going to start running through it. It is a little bit long, but I want you to keep in mind a lot of the length is things like checklists, links to other sites, resources that you can use. This is not a compendium. It's not 100 pages of things to read. And it has an index that gets updated. This is the most important page in the book. This is something people can do. You can do event stewarding. It can be a lot of fun. Don't panic. If you've never done something like this before, it's still something you can do. It's not magic, it's a learned skill, and I can show you how to do it. All right, so first thing, what's an event steward or an autocrat? We used to call them autocrats. We call them event stewards now. I am going to give you a piece of my philosophy about it. In my opinion, you are an event steward before you come on site. You are a steward of the event for your barony. When you're on site, you're an autocrat. And that's not meant to be a judgmental term. It's a literal term for a project management point of view. You're the person who makes decisions on site for your staff and for the event. Sometimes that decision is, I need to go get the seneschal. Sometimes the decision is, someone needs to call the police. Most of the time that decision is, hey, my gate staff is exhausted. I'm gonna go get somebody to replace them so that they get some rest. Or, hey, I have too many cooks in the kitchen. I'd like 3 of those volunteers to go help with parking instead. Those are autocratic decisions. You do them with a smile on your face. There's nothing bad about it. You are the central person who coordinates things while you're on site. In modern parlance, you are the adult in the room. So you're the one who's looking and saying, hey, people are tired, people are hungry, something new's come up, I need to go figure out what to do. That's all being an autocrat really means when you're talking about it as a project manager. So the first thing you want to do when you're doing an event, and all the things I'm going to be talking about are around baronial events. I'm not going to talk about kingdom events very much at all. All the things that are true for baronial events are mostly true for kingdom events. Kingdom events have an additional layer that has to do with the requirements of the kingdom. So like the crown tourneys, championships, kingdom officers, that they create an additional layer on top. So, but I'm not going to talk about those in this. I'm only going to talk about the baronial level events. So the first thing you're going to do is create a bid. When you create a bid, you're basically saying what you want the event to be, how much you think it's going to cost, and where you want it to be. Depending on how big the event is, you may want to put in who your staff is going to be at a high level. So if you're going to have a feast, when you put in your bid, it's probably a good idea to say, hey, I want to do a feast, and this is my amazing feastocrat, so that when you put in the bid, they know who you've asked to do the big part of the event. Those vary a lot, but this is an outline of the things that you want to look for in a bid. When you get a date for your event, there's a couple of things you need to do. One of them is, the very first thing, and this is new, this wasn't true a few years ago, you need to get access to the kingdom system. So once you've been awarded an event and you're going to be an event steward, you've got to get a user ID and password on the kingdom system. This is the link to it. It's super obvious one, onto your login. You can't fill out the paperwork for the event until you get that login, and it can take a couple of weeks. Sometimes it takes a day, sometimes it takes a couple of weeks. So you want to go do that as soon as possible so you have access to that system. That system will give you access to the ability to fill out your forms for the event, the ability to manage your website for your event, because the kingdom site will always create an event page for your event. Next thing you're going to do is, when you're looking at dates, this gets a little complicated. There's basically 3 levels of events in Ontier. First level events are crown events. You can't conflict with them. Excuse me. That's things like tournaments, crown tournaments, coronations, 12th night, that kind of stuff. You just can't conflict with them. Level 2 events, these are branch events, and they're not supposed to be of regional importance. They're supposed to be of local importance. So that's where you want to make sure that you're not conflicting with anybody nearby you. And if you're super nearby another event on the same date, you want to make sure you talk with that group and make sure that you're not asking the same people to be in two places at the same time. And I've done this. We've had to figure out that we had an event that was within 20 miles of another event, and it was fine because the 2 groups that were interested were completely different. One of them was in arts and sciences, and one of them was an archery competition. And the participants on both sides agreed that they didn't have any interest in going to the other events. So it can happen, it can be just fine. You want to make sure you play nice with your neighbors and have that conversation, though, because I've also had it go poorly and everybody had to change all of their dates. So make sure you communicate early and often about that. And this is a place where your seneschal and your coronets should probably be involved so that everybody's aware of what's going on. Level 3 events are more like fighter practices. They are smaller. There's no official business. You can't give awards if it's a level 3 event, and they just get listed on the website. And this is the part about conflicting zones where I was talking about the 20 miles or 2 hours. So if it's within 2 hours and you guys want to have it on the same date, there are conversations you want to have for a tier 2 event. And all of these rules aren't there to be bureaucratic. They're there to make people aware of what's going on around them and make sure everyone's communicating nicely with each other. They're not meant to be punitive. They're there so that we all have the chance to have all the fun that we can possibly have. All right. So the next thing, I'm gonna sort of race by some of this stuff because it's in this document is something you can go look at later. A lot of the next couple of sections are really me advocating that you use something that's a spreadsheet to keep track of costs and schedules. I'm actually a project manager in my professional life. I'm a project manager in large part because I learned how to do this stuff from running SCA events. So when I was much younger, I started running events. It turned out I really liked them, and that actually got me the credentials to be a PMP, a project manager. So now this is what I do for a living. So I'm a big proponent of making systems that make things as easy as possible because I like it. This is one of the systems where you can just make your life easy and use a spreadsheet. Doesn't matter if you use Google Sheets, Excel, whatever it is you're comfortable in. It could be Access if that's what makes you happy. But the idea of these is you want to put things into those systems so it's easy for you to calculate and easy for you to look up on a moment's notice whenever you need them. So this first one is a budget. You can see where this is literally a copy and paste from one of my Excel spreadsheets. So I put in the totals of how much things cost. I had it added up. I did it by estimated expenses, how much the site will cost, because usually our sites are a fixed fee of some variety. They're not a per person. And then we charge per person when they come in. So you need to know what your minimum number of attendees is to be able to break even, and then make sure that that's close to what you're expecting for that event. So if you have a $10,000 event site and you're only expecting 10 people to show up, unless you're going to charge $1,000 a person, it's probably not a good fit. But if you have a $1,000 event site and you think you're going to have 100 people there, $10 a person, you've covered your site costs. And this is where you do that calculation. Yeah, so you can see here's my break-even attendance fee. That's the fee that we would charge them. That's how much we'd have coming in. That's less than this and most of this. All right, so if anyone really wants me to go over NMRs, let me know in the chat and I will go over them. Otherwise, I will skip this as something we have talked to death. I'm fine talking about it again if anybody wants me to. Okay, I'm just gonna skip over that. It's in here, it's kept up to date. When you're looking for a site, you have to find a site before you can put in a really good bid, right? So there's a lot of places you can look. Some baronies and some principalities have books that are compilations of past sites. In the digital age, that's gotten a little complicated because those physical books have sort of wandered away. And they need to be kept up to date because these sites change all the time. So even with some kind of compendium of sites, or Orion wants me to define NMRs. Okay, so we'll go back for just a little bit. So NMRs are the non-member registration. This is the fee that is added to a site fee that goes directly to Kingdom. We never see this money at a baronial level. We never touch it. It's something that's added at gate. So whatever your site fee is, when you're calculating it as an event steward, you're going to calculate it with no consideration for what the NMR is at all, because it has essentially nothing to do with what you're doing. Three Mountains, which is where I've run most of my events for the last several years, actually has a divide between, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, we actually have a divide between the event steward and the exchequer. So the event steward never touches the money. So from Three Mountains' point of view, I literally never see the NMR. I need to make sure that it's in the site copy because we have to publish it in the site copy, but that's all I do with it. Okay, so it looks like Orion is good with that. So let's go back to finding a site. So some things to keep in mind. There's lots of places you can have a site. What you want to figure out is, what does your event need? What do you really need to do your event? So do you just need a flat piece of land? Do you need an afternoon championship tourney? And really all you need is a piece of flat land and a couple of biffies. Is it a feast? So you actually do need a kitchen. What kind of kitchen do you need if that's what you're doing? Do you need an outdoor kitchen? Do you need an industrial kitchen? Or do you just need a batch of outlets so that people can bring in a bunch of crock pots? What is your event doing and what do you really need? Once you have that list, You can start looking at different kinds of sites and be imaginative about it. You don't have to use the same sites every time. As wedding venues get more and more expensive, we're being pushed out of more and more sites that we used to use, because we're competing with weddings, which will use more money in a single day than our events ever will. So up in Portland, for example, sites that used to be $200 or $300 for a day are going for several grand for an 8-hour slot, because they're now wedding venues, because they're outdoors and beautiful, and they used to be our event fields. So be imaginative and go back and check places that you used to use, because their business models may have changed. Grange Halls, fantastic venue. One of the benefits of Grange Halls is they tend to have big kitchens and a big outdoor area. One of the downsides is Grange Halls, as a general rule, allows 0 alcohol. That isn't a national truism. Individual Grange Halls can choose to waive that rule. I've never seen one actually waive it, which means if you're doing a feast, which you want the kitchen for, there are some complications with communication and how you're going to do that. Schools and churches are fantastic, and because their administrations change, it's always worth going back and talking to them. If you couldn't use them 10 years ago, go back and see if that's still true or if that's changed. Things change over time. Farmers fields, community centers, parks. It's worth asking all of those things. What you want to do before you ask, though, is have your list of what you need at the event. For instance, if you want to use a local park for, say, a tournament, you have to ask when you talk to the park people if your tournament is going to be considered armed combat and if they will allow that, because those rules change. And whether it's a city, county, or state or federal park will have different responses to you. So it's worth checking. Be ready with your questions when you start talking with them. And then I have a huge list of other things to just sort of keep in the back of your mind when you're talking to them. Things like, are fire pits allowed? What's the handicapped access like for parking? And what kind of mobility do people need once they're actually on site? Will people who have mobility issues be able to get around? And there's just a lot of things to think about. Flushing toilets, whether there's water on site. Yeah, Oregon State Grange rules do make it harder. You're right, Orion. Like I said, I've never actually gotten to use a Grange Hall for that because I'm in Oregon. Other things to think about when you're talking to a site owner, there is a site owner's guide. I have a link to it in here. If they start asking questions that you may not be ready to answer, you can always refer to your seneschal and the site owner's guide. The owners of a property cannot be the ones who run the event. So they can't be the event steward. It's actually a kingdom law. There's no overlap allowed. For pets, this one comes and goes, so it's always worth checking and making sure it's up to date. Right now, there is a default setting for when pets are allowed and how, but the event steward can change that. If you publish it, you can say it can be something more restrictive, not less restrictive. So if you have like an off-leash park as part of your event, you need to make sure that everyone's aware of that and have that in your site handout. And that is one that's changed a couple of times in the last couple of years, so it's always worth checking. So this one's really important. This is one of our hard rules. This must be posted at gate at every SCA event, and it has to be big enough they can read it. So for our events, we have a laminated poster-sized copy of this. I think most Baronets do at this point, and you just make sure that that goes up on your gate table, wherever that is. It makes it easy. It means you don't have to do extra stuff. You just need to make sure it gets out of your storage area and is sitting at gate. It's also on all the site handouts. And sometimes we have events that don't have site handouts. I recommend always having a site handout because people need the announcements in a way they can see. We have a lot of people who don't keep their cell phones on when they're at events. They get to an event and they turn off their cell phone. So they aren't looking at the web pages or Facebook or anything else. It's the escape a lot of people are looking for directly. Also, we have kings occasionally who say we must have site handouts. It's happened a couple of times in the last couple of years, and they just flat out say, you will have site handouts. You can hand a physical copy to people. So rather than wonder whether at the current Royal Majesties have requested that or not, I'd say just have the site handouts. Make sure it has all the necessary announcements and the schedule on it. People use that more than they'll use their phones. This is another one. I'm going to give you the short version. You are more than welcome to read the longer version, and I have the details in here linked so you can look at them if you want to. It's a little boring. You need to know it if you're going to do an event, but here's the short version. We have insurance. There is paperwork to do for the insurance. Your seneschal will need to be involved in that paperwork. If you need additional insurance, there's a fee for it. If you need additional insurance, it can take a lot of time to get it done, so make sure you ask early to get the additional insurance. The rush fee, I believe right now, is $500. There's a rush fee that's super expensive. You don't ever want to deal with it. If you need the additional insurance, there's a $50 fee for leaving them 3 weeks to get it to you. Horses require extra insurance and paperwork. Get somebody who specializes in that to help you with it at your event. It's extra complicated and there are extra things you need to do. It's not insurmountable, it's not bad, it's just more complicated and tends to change a little more often. So assuming you have an equestrian marshal in your barony, that's the person you want to go to along with your seneschal to talk with them about what you need to do for insurance. Golf carts now require additional paperwork and more insurance as well. I believe the last time I checked, it made it too expensive for it to be feasible for us to have golf carts at events anymore. I'm hoping that changes, but right now, it's just not feasible. And the last thing is, of course, try and avoid claims. You super don't want to do the extra paperwork of the claims. If you do, your seneschal and your exchequer will be able to help you with it. I've never actually had to file a claim, so hopefully I never will, and I won't ever have to do that part of the paperwork. So it's super uncommon, but it is out there. All right, and then you can see all of these links. So this is to the SCA Seneschal's Handbook, the insurance cert. Here's where your branch seneschal will send the paperwork, and then here's the stuff about the equestrian. Always go to that website. It changes pretty regularly. All right, so you've gotten to the point where you've got a bid in, you're gonna run this cool event, you're super excited about it because you should be excited about it. You get to drive the fun part of the event for everybody. So here's where I'm gonna tell you again, I think you should use spreadsheets. Putting your schedule in a spreadsheet will make your life so much easier. You can see on here, I've got by time down one side, and then I've got by location on the top. And I called them tracks because for this event they were. So I have a heavy fighters track, I have a youth track, classes, competitions, and archery, and then the fencing group. And then you can see I have in each of those, in these little boxes, whoops, sorry about that. In each of the boxes, I say what it is, so I can see where it is, when it is, what it is, and who's running it for me. Because if I'm the event steward, I shouldn't be running anything individual at the event. I should be busy elsewhere or available for troubleshooting, so I shouldn't be running anything by default. If something happens and I need to jump into something, that's different, that's the troubleshooting part. And part of the reason in this setup that I have who's running it is to make sure that my helium hand volunteers haven't tried to do 2 or 3 things on opposite sides of the event at the same time. It happens every event. I have at least one conflict where I look at it and go, that person is supposed to be on the list field and in the kitchen at the same time. That won't work. And I can see it here. So I can go talk to them before the event happens and say, which would you rather do? Or do we need to change the time on something before we publish the schedule? Because you can do either beforehand. If you're actually at the event, it's more complicated. So this is one of the places where you can save yourself and your volunteers a lot of pain. Just make it easy. Yeah, Zuleika, you're right. So the spreadsheet setup is great for you to keep track of when you're on your computer at home. It's not usually a good setup for your event handout. So what I usually do is take this setup, and when I've locked it down with all of my, and I actually send this to all of my volunteers and have them check it for me and make sure that they haven't noticed something that I missed, because more eyes are always good ahead of time. So when that's all done, I'll actually take this and turn it into a time list that will go on the event schedule. It won't be in this format at all. And part of the reason I do that myself instead of delegating it is so that I have my hands on it one more time to make sure I'm clear on all of the things. I may catch something else that I need to change around or move because I'm touching it again and putting it into a different visual format. It's a good way for me to double check what I'm doing. And then again, I send that out to a couple of people and have them double check that I haven't missed something. Flex time. So one of the things you'll see in here is I've got some blank spots, and I've also got a couple of things where I've made them bigger than they really need to be. I call that flex time because we run on SCA time. And if you have more than 3 Scadians in the same place at the same time, they will have different concepts of what time things should start and stop. So because there are things that must start on time, like court, from the event steward's point of view, it must start on time. We must make it available for the coronets or the crowns to start the court when they've asked for it. I build in flex time. That also gives people time to get to and from locations. So if you have a big event site, they have time to get across the site to the next thing. Baroness's nap time is good too. Okay, so briefly about pre-registration. If you can avoid it, don't do it. Generally, we don't have a good reason to do it. It's not necessary for most things. When it's necessary, absolutely do it. Think really hard about what you actually need to know. Do you need to know for sure exactly how many people are coming to the event? Do you need to know that 59 people will be on site at 10 a.m.? Or do you need to know that about 100 people will be there throughout the day? Because we can't do online payments very easily. It's still pretty complicated to deal with. It's still kind of a nightmare for the exchequers and the event stewards to coordinate because of the limitations we have. Something that should be super easy online still isn't for us. So if you can avoid it, I would. If you really need to do it, do it. Just make sure you're being really clear in communications with your exchequer and your seneschal about why you need it and how you're going to perform it. Yes and no. They've made it easier. There's still a lot of issues with the exchequers being able to get that money and transfer it and keep track of it than at gate. So it's getting better. Absolutely. It's still not something that's smooth. So if you don't need it, I advocate for people not using it unless they really need it. If you're doing a pre-reg feast where it's like $25 a person and you need to know exactly how many people are going to be there, absolutely do it. If you're talking about 400 people, maybe not. Okay, so next topic, publication. When you put out information about your event, you need to make sure that you are clear in your local group who needs to put out the communications and who needs to approve the wording in them. Occasionally, there are baronies where the seneschal must okay every single word that's published. So the event steward ends up writing it, submitting it to an event to the seneschal, and then the seneschal submits it after it's approved. There are variations of that, and it's going to depend on local rules at the time as well as access to different online resources. So if you are in fact the one as an event steward who can publish things, here's how the crier is working right now. This is again subject to change without notice to any of us. So if this changes and you find out before it gets reflected here, let me know and I'll update it. Here it is as far as I know at the moment. First step is you have to have an event information form. It needs to be filled out and sent in. Ideally, you are doing this months and months before the event, like a year before the event. Excuse me. Once the event information form exists, you can put information into the crier. You actually must put information into the crier to make it an official event. And this is the current deadline, the 15th of the month, 2 months before your events take place. So May 15th is the deadline for a July event. So you need to put it in months in advance. Formatting. She's real specific about it when she wrote this last. You've got 350 words. You don't have the space to put anything extra, which is fine because the crier is really serving right now as our official record of the event. It's not serving as your event advertisement at all. This is what makes it an official event. Like you say, you do pre-reg by default. Are you doing it all online now, or are you doing it by mail? All online? Okay, then I would love to have a conversation with you about that later. I just talked to my exchequer last week, and the nightmare that he was going through trying to make it work for us with the kingdom restraints made it unfeasible still. So let's talk about that later. I would love to get that updated with what you're doing. Okay, so crier. Required information. They have a list. Okay. Same answer though. I'd select to talk to Gwyneth about it. All right. Crier, required information. She has a list that she published, and you need to follow this exactly to get it published in the crier. This is her list of what must happen. Don't deviate from it. Don't get clever about it. I have gotten back emails of, yeah, that's funny. It's 100 words over. Cut out 100 words, which gets it back to this list and nothing else. So once you've done the official, make this what happens. This goes in the crier. We're now official and registered. The next thing you're going to do is look at your branch newsletters and make sure that those have all the information in them. Generally for branch newsletters, putting them in with a little bit more flavor makes them more fun, because this is where you want to get people excited about it. And then social media. So social media is super complicated right now. This is the social media policy as of 2018. I would not be shocked if this gets updated pretty soon, but this is still what was in place the last time I checked, which was March. Here's how you need to, so there's a procedure. You have to do a page. It needs to not be in the discussion group. Your page is going to be created by the kingdom, and they're going to give it to you with access to make updates to it. It will also be accessible to the officers, your seneschal usually, and sometimes your social media officer as well if you have one. Not all baronies have them. And then you'll be putting updates on that page. We don't have enough time for me to go through this in detail. I will tell you to go out and look at the link and read through the rules for it. And make sure that you're having a good conversation with your seneschal and your social media deputy, if you have one, about who's going to post, who's going to monitor it, and who answers any comments or questions on it, and what you do if something needs to be deleted or updated. So it sounds more complicated than I think it really is. It's just a place where you need to make sure you have good communication with the officers that are involved. And you can see how long the rules are. There's just a lot going on there. And this is something everybody needs to keep in mind, especially right now. Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all of them, TikTok, they all have different rules that they are in charge of. We are not in charge of the rules that they use. We're not in charge of their platform. We don't pay for their platform. They aren't going to tell us necessarily when they make any updates. So if you're going to use social media, you need to make sure you're monitoring it regularly for anything that's changed. I will tell you something we found in the last couple of months on Facebook. Facebook does not make things visible to people the way they did 8 weeks ago. It has fundamentally changed. So where we used to be able to do baronial events, like online events, like we have a movie night we do every Friday, and I could create an event on the baronial page, I could push it out, and everybody would see it over the course of 3 or 4 days if they were on Facebook. That is no longer the case. They will see it sometimes. We don't know what the rules are for them seeing it or not. Sometimes they'll actually see it a week or more after the event has actually happened. So they're getting notifications about things in the past they never saw beforehand. And this is a new twist. My husband and I are both on Facebook, and we have each other set to monitor so we can see what each other are doing, because, you know, generally I'm terribly fond of him and I like seeing what he's doing. Facebook no longer showed me his feed. It was totally gone from my feed for almost 2 weeks. I actually had to click the follow button on him, not just flag him, and even that gets me about half of his posts. So when you're trying to reach out to people, be aware that the rules of these social media platforms are not predictable. We don't know what's going to happen or when it's going to change. Yeah, it's a little crazy making, and they've changed the algorithms at least 3 times in the last 8 weeks because we've watched different circumstances start coming up and we've been able to actually test them with our barony. So ideally you'll have a single source of truth, which Three Mountains is working towards that being the website. So for us, for events going forward, the website will be the thing that always has the correct information, and we'll just use social media to point back to it, which is not the way we've been doing things for the last couple of years. All right. I've got about 10 minutes to run through the rest of it, and then I want to get over to the online part. This is usually a 2-hour class, so we're kind of racing through it. So contact lists. This is an old-fashioned thing that I highly recommend doing when you're an event steward. This is a list, a physical list of all of your event staff with their phone numbers and their email addresses. And you build it up as you're working on the event. And then when you're actually on site, you have a physical copy of it printed out that you keep with you so that you can reach them if you need to. It's also so that if anything happens to you, like you step in a mole hole and break your ankle and need to be off site, you have this physical copy of what needs to happen and who to contact that you can actually just hand off to somebody, and then you can walk away with a clear conscience because you've handed them all the information they need to keep the event going. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute too, some more about the physical piece to have with you to hand over to people in an emergency. This is a brief discussion about officers and talking with your branch officers. So different baronies have different expectations of their officers for events. Three Mountains has a policy or a tradition of the first right of refusal. So if there's going to be combat at an event, the event steward is supposed to talk to the night marshal in Three Mountains, and the night marshal will either say, I got it, I'm your head marshal, and I'll take care of the volunteers, or they're supposed to say, you know what, I can't be at that event, I will get you the person who will be your marshal in charge for that event. So those expectations are part of the officers' jobs in Three Mountains. That doesn't mean you can't, it doesn't mean you can avoid talking to them about it beforehand. You still need to reach out and have a good conversation with them about what you need, what kind of volunteers they're going to need, and then see how you can help each other do that. For instance, if you're going to have a giant tournament that's going to have 6 fields that's going to run for 3 hours, you should have that conversation with whoever your marshal in charge is months before the event happens so that they know how many volunteers they need, and they can help you figure out, no, you don't need 6 fields, you only need 4 for that, or whatever it is. So these are all about communication. Communicate early and often with all the officers that are going to be involved. Ideally, you will always have a deputy event steward, somebody who is your backup if something goes wrong. So this person should be involved in what you do and aware of it. They shouldn't be a co-event steward. I've seen very, very few people, very, very few people who can pull off a co-event steward relationship on a site without making it super stressful for the people involved. When you have two people who can make the same decisions, you get a mother may I effect. And even if that goes super well, if you've got two people who are in charge on opposite sides of the event site and they don't know the other person has made a decision, they could totally unwittingly give the opposite decision, causing chaos amongst your volunteers. Nobody comes out of that happy. So rather than having co-event stewards, I'd say have a deputy. So it's always clear who's in charge, who's making those decisions, and that person is their backup. So if the person gets hurt, sick, pulled away into something else, there is somebody that everyone knows to go to in their place. And then the deputy event steward, if the event steward comes back on site, can say, here's the 18 things that happened while you were gone, here's the decisions I made, and they can hand it over to that person, and then they step back into being a deputy again. Again, this is all about communication. This is super important. Don't make your exchequer mad. Don't make them crazy. Be nice to your exchequer. Their job is super hard. It only gets harder every year we have more paperwork. One of the things we have in Three Mountains is the exchequer actually has to approve the person who's in charge of gate. So we have to have a conversation pretty early on that says, hey, this is the person who's volunteered to be in charge of gate. Can you authorize them to be in charge? Because the person in charge of gate has to be able to handle the money and turn over the money in the manner that the exchequer expects it to be turned over for accountability. They need to have the conversation about it. And usually the conversation is something like, oh yeah, I've worked with them 5 times, no problem. Or, I've never worked with them before. Can you set up a meeting time for us so we can sit down and I can make sure they know all of our exchequer policies so that we're all on the same page before the event happens. That's also when the conversation about who brings the gate sheets on site happens. If they don't have that conversation, both of them are going to think the other person is bringing the gate sheets. And you don't want there to be no gate sheets when gate opens. Something that I do with receipts is, because this is back to the exchequer thing. I want to make sure that my exchequer has the simplest possible way to close out the books after the event. The way that I tend to do that is I have it really clear with my volunteers that if they buy anything that they want to be reimbursed for, they need to tell me ahead of time, tell me about what it's going to cost, and then they have to hand me the receipt. So, and the receipt has to have their name on it, and I have to receive it before the end of the event. So ideally at the event, I tell them I'm going to be sitting, up at the shelter for most of the afternoon. Remember to bring me your receipts. And they'll hand them to me before they pack up. And I have a stack of receipts, and I will sit there and fill out the paperwork for the exchequer for every single receipt, and then hand them over to the exchequer in one big batch. He writes all of the checks, and those all get dispersed before anybody leaves site. Because having things open for months afterwards just makes everybody crazy. And I'm serving 2 things. One of them is I can close out the event quicker because all the money's been accounted for, and we can't close the event until the accounting is done. And the second thing is anybody who spent money gets reimbursed before the event's over. They get that check in their hand before they go home. I don't want people who may be short on money and really wanted to be helpful, so they bought the 20 pounds of oranges. I don't want them to go short because they did that. I want to make sure they get paid back as fast as possible. And then the last exchequer bit here is, oh, that's my warning. Make sure your refund policy is clear before you post anything for the event. So that's a conversation with your seneschal and your exchequer. It's going to depend on the barony and what your policies are. Make sure you understand what it is before the event starts. And ideally, if you do pre-registration, you need to be solid on what that refund policy is before you receive a single penny of money. Because the last thing you want to do is be wondering what's supposed to happen when you've got a handful of checks that you need to refund. This is not a theoretical. The things that have happened this year with refunds for pre-reg are not small. So I'm going to sort of skim over the stuff for gate because that's, again, those are all conversations you need to have with your exchequer. And we're going to skip over to modern law things. So a couple of things you guys need to know. You're not the cops. You don't ever need to act like the cops. Our job as event stewards is never to enforce the law, ever. It is not our jobs. We are not trained for it. If there is a problem that requires the police, you go find your seneschal and you discuss with them whether police need to be called. If it's a direct emergency, like it's something that if you were at home and it was a 911 emergency, call the cops. If there's a delay where you're like, there's something really scary going on with that group of people, it's not an imminent threat, but I think we might need to call some help, go find your seneschal, have the conversation, do it quick, and then decide whether police involvement needs to happen. This is also super important. We don't administer anything legal. So if somebody comes up and tells you that there's a restraining order against so-and-so and they need to not be within 50 feet of them, that is important. You should support that person. It is not your job to enforce it. It is not the SCA's job to enforce it. If they need to call the police, you can support them in doing that. You can do things to make it more comfortable for them or to make them feel safer, but that is your choice of what to do. It is not a requirement of being an event steward. And since this is all super serious stuff, does anyone have questions about those? Okay. And when we have conversation, Tim, at the end of this, we can also talk about it then. Signing things. This is also a modern law thing. As an event steward, you are a warranted deputy of a seneschal. Seneschals are the ones who can sign things. Seneschals can designate their deputies to sign things for them. This, Maral, your yes and no. I have a lot of feelings about that, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I hesitate to say anything about that right now because the things I'm talking about are things where there's an imminent threat to somebody on the site. It's super rare, but we have had things like somebody come on site with a rifle who is clearly disturbed, potentially drugged and disturbed, and threaten people. And that is actually what I'm talking about when I talk about calling the police. Yeah. And that also applies for things like the fire department or emergency services. So needing an ambulance. It's those kinds of considerations. Agreed. For the legal basis, we have to involve the authorities, and that's where you have the conversation with your seneschal and make those decisions. So signing things. If you're a warranted deputy, you can sign things. It's legal. Having said that, you need to make sure that you're super clear that your seneschal has actually designated you as an event steward and their deputy to make signatures happen on their behalf, because the seneschal is the one who is the signatory for it. So we've had, and Three Mountains, we've done it both ways. We've had periods of time when the seneschal was the only person in the barony who could make signatures. We've had other times when, because of rule changes, they could again delegate to the event stewards. So it's a conversation you need to make sure is clear between you and your seneschal. Yep. So Zuleka is saying that in Terra Pomaria, only the seneschal does the signatures and event stewards don't. So Three Mountains, one of the things we do is there's a report to council that happens every month from the time your bid is accepted until the time the event is closed. Even if you can't go physically, you have to send in some kind of report that says everything's fine, or I've got 18 new things, or I need new volunteers, or whatever it is. You need to send in some kind of report every month because the barony has trusted you to do an event, and they need to know that you're okay and that everything's going along. It doesn't have to be all sunny. It can be, I'm short 6 volunteers, I need help. I mean, that's a totally legit thing to put into a report. But you need to do the reports regularly, even if they're not required, partly to make sure you get enough volunteers, partly because you want people to be excited and looking forward to the event. And if you show up every month and go, we've got 3 new things, I've got some new prizes, and also I need 6 other volunteers. It gets people excited to participate, and it gets them excited and looking forward to the event. Please include that in your report. All right, so then here's some miscellaneous stuff. When you are buying things, make sure you have the nonprofit code for the SCA and ask them if they will give you a discount. Places like Home Depot will give you a discount on anything you buy there if you give them the code for it. It's always worth asking. 20% isn't much here and there, but it adds up, and it can be the difference between getting some extra fun for your event and just the bare minimums. Anytime you are doing something for your barony, make sure you look up what the current requirements are for your barony in particular. So Three Mountains has more rules than a lot of baronies. We have, there's actually a whole checklist later in this document that is specific for Three Mountains for things event stewards need to do. Just make sure you're looking at what it is. Here's some stuff about your volunteers, getting them and keeping them. So ask early and often for volunteers. Make sure that people know that you need volunteers. Make sure they know what you need a volunteer for. And make sure you communicate with them often. So if you have somebody who's going to be in charge of gate, make sure that you know how often you need to check in with them to make sure that they have what they need. So that could be you have an event steward meeting with all of your volunteers once a month for the whole time before the event. It could be you send out an email once a week. Figure out how you want to communicate reliably with your volunteers, and then make sure you do it. Because you want to be able to check in with them and to make sure that they are okay with what they're doing, that they have what they need, and if they have any questions, they know they can ask you early enough to get good answers. Here are some of the things that are non-officer event staff that you might want. Setup and teardown crews are great. Don't ever make the people who do setup and tear down the same people. They will fry themselves trying to do it. A volunteer coordinator, if you're gonna have a big enough event for it. Somebody for parking, somebody for a landmaster. If you got a big campsite and you need some kind of order to where the camps are, having a landmaster is great. Water bearers, you still need somebody to set up water. It's no longer an office. We are still allowed to put up water for people to get water on, not just on the combat field, but at the event. So I've got a note in here about that. And this is the actual quote from Corpora about it. So if anybody asks you about it, you can refer back here. Basically, it's saying that you can use SCA money for water-bearing supplies. We just can't have an officer who's in charge of it. And you can have a volunteer in charge of it. And they're just putting out water, or, you know, water and pickles and oranges. This is the reminder to delegate. Do not try and do everything yourself. You will make yourself crazy, exhausted, and you won't have as much fun. Also, if you don't delegate, you're not teaching somebody else how to do a job. The only way we get more volunteers is if we teach them how to do the jobs in ways that they're comfortable with, which usually means small pieces. Give them a small piece, let them do it. Give them a bigger piece, let them do that. Build them up until they can be an event steward just like you. But you want to delegate that, not just for your own sanity, but so that you have other people who can have some of the fun too. Comping people. So this is another place where different baronies have different rules about it. Three Mountains has rules about the exact list of who's going to be comped has to be approved by the council ahead of time. You should definitely make sure that if you're going to have a comp list, it's published in a way that's clear and concise and can be handed to a person at gate in a way that is not confusing. And that list should be the only list of people who are comped. You don't want to get into a situation where you have to explain to your exchequer why 5 people who weren't on the comp list didn't pay to get in. And then here's some self-care stuff. So when you're an event steward, especially if you're going to do a full weekend event, not just an afternoon event, there are some things that are going to happen. You're going to plan this for about a year. You're going to have days when everything is bad, everything's gone wrong, and you need somebody to vent to. Figure out ahead of time who that person is. Make sure it's somebody you trust. Make sure it's somebody who understands that you are just blowing off steam and won't talk about what you said to anybody else, because there will be days when one of your volunteers gets on your very last nerve and you blow your stack and they're just the last straw. It's not actually anything to do with them. They were just the last person in front of you before you lost the rest of your patients. So pick somebody you can vent to who understands that's the case, and just be ready for that moment. At some point, you will probably panic. Also, totally normal. There is a lot going on, and especially the first time you do it, there will come a night when you're, 2 a.m., you wake up and think of 83 things that you should have done. It's fine. It's normal. Everybody panics about it at least once. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. Call somebody, talk to them, have them talk through what's making you crazy. Take a deep breath. It's going to be fine. And see that first page where it says don't panic. Which isn't don't feel panicked, just understand that it will fade and everything will be fine. This is the second plug for delegating. Don't try and do it all. You'll make yourself crazy. If it's at all possible, get somebody else to be in charge of your food for the day or for the weekend. You will start running around. It's really easy to forget that it's time to eat. You may not even realize it's time to eat. Having somebody who just packs you a day of food and hands it to you when it gets hot out, and then again when it cools down at night, it's really worth it. It means you'll be able to go longer and you won't worry about why am I so irritable, when the answer is because I haven't eaten in 8 hours. Lots of people run events, ask questions. God knows we love talking about all the things we do for event stewarding. You'll get more information than you may have wanted, but anything you can use to make it easier for you will make it worth it. This is one of the things I do for bigger events. I have an event stewards bag, and I try to keep it as light as possible, but I keep all of this stuff in it. At the end of the event, it will be empty, and it's because I will have handed it all out to other people. It all goes to my volunteers at some stage. There will be the person who's angry, who I hand a cheese stick to. There will be the person who forgot their sunblock and is starting to scorch, and I hand them sunblock because they're running around doing jobs for me for the event, and they've gotten busy in that and forgotten to take care of themselves. So I have this bag so I can hand things out to them. Chocolate bars, no kidding, those are for people who are sugar crashing, and you can just hand them some chocolate. Aspirin, your cell phone, make sure you have your cell phone because you need to have it with you if there's any cell service. People will call you and text you. And then my favorite part, which is thank you tokens. And this whole section is how to say thank you. Pick the thing that makes you happy to say thank you. The thing I like to do is to have little gifts for them. It's something I've usually spent 6 or 8 months messing with to make something that makes me happy. Usually it's something in the theme of the event because that's what I like doing. Other people like doing praise in public, so they make sure they say thank you where their volunteers' friends can hear them. It can be thank you notes, like actually writing out an old-fashioned note, or it could be a detailed email after the event that says, I saw you doing these 85 things, you're amazing, thank you. Whatever it is that makes you happy as a manner of saying thank you, set yourself up to do that. It means a lot to your volunteers, and there's no reason it can't be something that's enjoyable for you. It shouldn't feel like a chore when you do it. Having said that, do make sure that you take some notes, and as soon as you have the brain space after the event, send in the awards recommendations that are appropriate. Do it before you forget. You're in one of the best places to be able to give those details to somebody who could give them the awards. Oh, I'm sorry, Zuleika, I missed your comment about comping. Comping is for jobs, not people. Yes. There's usually a list that says what those jobs are. I avoid saying jobs because people tend to get a little confused about coronets versus officers if I say jobs. And one of the things that we often do is we comp sitting coronets because functionally they're doing their job while they're on site, but on event side, people often don't like to hear that the coronet is doing a job. So I tend to avoid calling it a job. Okay, so last bit, final reports. So ideally, you walk off site and you are completely closed with your event other than your final reports. Thank you, Shanti. Have a good evening. What you want to do is gather up your notes. gather up all your notes, look at what went well, look at what didn't go well, figure out what you may have learned from that, or what you could suggest to future users of the site or the event, things that will be useful for somebody else, and make sure all of that is in your event report. And that report is what you should give to your barony and to the baronial officers so they're aware of it. We're not, in the SCA, we're not awesome at keeping those kinds of records. I think we often spare future event stewards a lot of pain and effort when we do those, and we keep the records well. So things like an event site that has particularly problematic site stewards, making sure people are aware of that. I have one site that I've worked with where I actually had to delegate a middle-aged man to be my liaison with them. And I've had to recommend to other women who have run things on that site that they do the same, because the event site is fantastic. The people who live there and are your primary contact are a little problematic to deal with if you're female. So keeping those kinds of records and being able to say, hey, this thing was super hard, here's an easy way we could deal with it in the future, that's really useful to people going forward. And it's not a reflection on you as having done anything wrong or bad. This is a learning process. Nobody's going to do it perfectly ever. And we should be okay saying, hey, this could be easier. Here's a good way to make it easier the next time. Whether that's me or another event steward or, 8 event stewards from now on that same location or with that same event. It's a learning process and there's nothing wrong with that. All right, so the next stuff in here are all the links. So these are all different resources you can get to. I'm not going to go over them. I'm just going to kind of scroll by. Here's event steward links. They are for Untier. Some of them are for Corpora. It's, as far as I know, it's everything you need for an event steward to be able to get to all the things you need. These are all the links that I use when I'm running an event. These are some websites that are just some resources of things to look at. Untier actually has an event stewards section of the Kingdom website that has a lot of good resources on it. And then these are some forms. So this is the check request form. So it's in here just so you can see it. When you get receipts from your volunteers, this is the form that either you or they will fill out. I prefer to fill it out myself because then I know it has all the information on it. And then this is, I was saying that different baronies have different requirements for event stewards, and this is the checklist that I made based on the Three Mountains requirements. It's not a bad set of stuff to do, which is why I include it here. You don't have to abide by this by any means, but it has the checklist by chronological order. So when you're proposing an event, here's the stuff that you need. When you're getting ready for the event, here's the stuff you need to do for that. And then all the way down here, when you're on site, this is the stuff you have to do. And after the event, here's this last list of stuff you have to do. Three Mountains requires this. Other baronies won't necessarily. The stuff that's required in here, none of it's bad stuff. Most of it's about guaranteeing that you've communicated appropriately with all the people involved. Okay, so with that, I'm going to flip over very briefly to the other document, and then I'll open it up for conversation. So this is our new online event stewards guide. Right now, none of the events in Untier are official events. They are all by definition unofficial and cannot have court in them. That doesn't mean we can't gather online and call them events. So things like our arts and sciences, not competitions, our arts and sciences gatherings that we used to have every week, now we do them online in Zoom. We can still do competitions. We can still do all kinds of things online. They're just not considered official events because we can't have court. So having said that, with all of those caveats, here's the stuff we can do. We can do meetings. We can do classes like this one online. We can do consultations. So when you want to do your heraldic consultations for your name and your device, you can totally do those online. We can do social things online. The something new, I'm trying to figure out if we can do stuff like, and this isn't a permission issue, it's permission-wise we can do it. I'm still trying to figure out the logistics of how we do it for things like some of the graduating classes had people set up Minecraft servers where they recreated their entire college campus so they could all have virtual graduations. I want to see if we can do that for some events. I think we could get some of the kids to set up like our event sites and then actually have classes and events and conversations in those venues. But it's going to take some work to set up. So I'm trying to figure out what some of those new ideas are. There's also Animal Crossing, which I need to get an account on so I can try this out. I just talked to somebody who had their birthday on Animal Crossing, and their friend went in and did a virtual island decoration party for her. And then all of her friends came to the Animal Crossing location and they all had a virtual party for her. If 12-year-olds can do that, I think we can do this. And it would be more fun to have it in a Minecraft castle than it's going to be just sitting in our living rooms, right? Because then we at least get the event look to them. Right? We can totally build castles in a Minecraft set. If those college kids can do their entire university, I saw some screenshots of it. They literally built their university down to the last detail. You could walk into the buildings. There's no reason we couldn't do that and use them over and over again for event venues. Anyway, that's some longer term stuff. Although if anybody's interested, let me know, because I'm still looking for people to help me with it. So here's a quick look at some of the technologies. This is not exhaustive. These are just the ones that I've seen people using the most right now. And here's the comparison of what they do. So like YouTube, you can have conversations, sort of. You can do text and videos. You can't do voice. You can do recordings. So yeah, we should use them. We can use this for these virtual events. Some of the ones I don't recommend are Google Hangouts, although this will change in the next 2 weeks, and I'll update this because Google Hangouts is about to release the next series of this, which will make it so we can do recording and external people can participate. Zoom is great. I mean, we're using it right now. Instagram, sorta, it's super limited for video and you can't do any voice stuff, so not really good for events, good for other stuff. Discord also, yeah, totally, use Discord. It's great. And then I've got some write-ups in here of like general things about it, things you can do. I love the thing Pumpkin did where they had all of the different conversation groups. So she actually had it set up so that on the Discord channels they had a general announcements one, they had a heavy combat one. I mean, this whole list, they had specialized rooms in Discord. It's a little like what you can do with Zoom for meetings, because you can set off those separate rooms in Zoom and have a central area. I'm watching the PMP certification I have for project management. They moved one of their conferences online. They used Zoom and they actually had a virtual entry hall. So when you sign in, you get to the entry hall and then it has links on it. And each of those is a different class that you could walk into. And some of them were live and some of them were recorded. So you actually picked which ones and you got professional credentialing from going to them. It was the same as going to a live convention. Oh, the Discord server's still up? Awesome. I would love to see more stuff like that. So here's some more stuff around like YouTube Live. Here's some of the details. Facebook. I do need to update the Facebook thing. It is so much more unpredictable than it was even 3 weeks ago. I don't know what they're doing, but they keep changing the algorithms and it's getting worse. Facebook Messenger. Facebook Messenger is great for one-on-one conversations, and they've just added multi-person conversations. So for probably not for event stuff at all, but for like local conversations where you need like your financial committee to talk and you need like 8 people in there super quick and you're probably already connected on Facebook, that may turn into a more useful venue for that kind of conversation. And then we got Google Hangouts and Zoom. Some stuff about event staffing. Don't try and do it alone. It's virtual, so it may feel like it's going to be an easier lift. It's not easier, it's just different. You're going to need different people, and ideally you're going to need at least one person for each instance of whatever you do, whether that's multiple rooms, like one person for each Zoom room, one person for Discord and one for Zoom. Whatever it is, you need to block it out so you have a different volunteer for each location or each virtual venue. Because they're going to need to spend, especially at the beginning of kinds of things like this, they're going to need to spend a lot of time doing basically tech support. click this button, don't click that button, did you download it, all of those things that get us working, because right now we're not talking about standardized technology, we're all over the place. So even the really technologically savvy are going to stumble occasionally and go, where's the button? I've never seen this before and I need to be online in 10 minutes, which totally didn't happen to me earlier tonight or anything, but it did. And I kid you not, I'm an IT project manager, so it just happens to everyone. There's too much tech going on right now. So just be prepared for that and make sure you get a person in each room who can support it for whoever comes online. Some other stuff to keep in mind when you start planning things like this. Internet access is not universal. We sort of have to pretend like it is right now, which is unfortunate. We still have people who don't have internet access at home. They were accessing the internet through like local libraries and schools. They can't do that right now. We don't know when they'll be able to do that again. It is going to leave people out. If there's anything we can do to rectify that or support that, we should do it. Super complicated conversation, and I don't have good answers for it other than we need to be aware of it and keep talking about it. People have body issues with being on camera. Until you get used to it, if you ever get used to it, don't stick your tongue out at me. There are people who are really, really good teachers who will teach in person at events who flat out refuse to do it online because they're so uncomfortable being recorded. And it all comes back to, we have a cultural issue with who should and shouldn't be on TV, and here the air quotes of should, and it's deeply ingrained, and there are people who will just refuse to be online. If they do that, don't push them. Encourage them, tell them you're happy to have them, but don't push them, because there are a whole bunch of issues happening there, and we are not the arbiters of that. We just need to be there and support them. Security is another one. This is another place where if you have an awesome teacher who just refuses to be online, if you know them well enough, have a conversation about it, but don't push them, because they may also have security issues. They may be staying offline because it's not safe for them to be visible on the internet. I will tell you, I have experienced that in the past, and knowing that this will be on YouTube and knowing some other things that will be on YouTube, I am uncomfortable with it as well. It's been long enough ago that I'm going to do it anyway, but I have been in that place, and I will tell you, there were times in my life when no one could have convinced me to go online. So don't push them. Tell them that you'll support them. If you're a good enough, close enough friend to have the conversation, you can ask them why, but let it go if you need to. And then we have this thing about required accounts. Some things require an account, like Facebook requires an account. YouTube doesn't require an account to see things. So when you're picking venues, decide mindfully what venues you're going to use. Are you going to do something that's going to require someone to create a new account online? Is it really necessary to do it that way? It may be completely legitimate, but make sure you're doing it mindfully, so that if you say you have to have an account to participate, you have a good reason for it. And then here's a couple of just quick notes. Ontier has an online calendar for virtual events. Right now, they're mostly doing kingdom stuff. So if you're going to do something inside of the kingdom, they're mostly doing things at a kingdom level. So it's mostly showing stuff from other kingdoms and like larger Ontierian things. But it is going up and getting updated regularly. And Ontier actually has media accounts on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. So if you want to use those for your local events, think about how that would be useful. Think about how you would want to hook into that, and then talk to the administrators about that. And lastly, this is a thank you to Maeve. She ran that fantastic event, and that's what kicked off me getting this new version going for online events. So again, I'm going to put my plug in here for, if you think of new things, experience new things with any of these, have good ideas or any ideas about what to add, let me know. These are living documents that are meant to be in service to the Kingdom and the SCA, so I am happy to update with anything that's useful. And that is my 2-hour class in 1 hour and 17 minutes. So why don't we just open it up for any questions that people have or discussion topics.
Have you had any significant challenges that you feel like we could learn from?
Yes. However, my first event, my first event as an event steward, I will not actually tell event stewards about until they run their first event.
Gotcha.
Because mine was so weird and so bad, and there are not warning tales enough from it because it's just so weird. So I will happily tell the story to somebody after they've run an event, and we will tell it late at night over a fire. I am happy to tell the story. In hindsight, it became very, very funny to me, but it was a nightmare, and I will not give that to somebody who hasn't run an event before. I don't think it's fair.
This is like childbirth, isn't it? You
No,
don't
it's
tell
really
first
not.
timers the truth until it's too late for them to back out.
No, genuinely, it's not. What happened to me was so genuinely bizarre that I can't even give you warning stories from it. As one piece of it, we were up at the Silver Creek Falls cabins, and they had decided to do the repairs on them the day we arrived to take the site, and they got a convict crew to do it, which meant we couldn't even be on the site, and they had literally ripped out the entire kitchen. It was an empty room, and I was supposed to cook for 200 people. There's nothing to learn from that other than you need to be flexible, and I do teach that class about how to be flexible and why you should be flexible. But that was literally the first 10 minutes, and it just got weirder after that.
So perhaps the lesson we take from that is your event can fall completely apart, but you can still make it through and go on.
Yeah,
and exactly what you've been after.
It actually is, and one of the links in there is it's called How to Be Flexible, and it's a humorous take on the things from that event. And really what I learned was you need to plan as much as you can, over plan, so that when things go weird, you've got a way to deal with it, and you just need to be flexible and just know that what we do for event stewards nobody's gonna get hurt. I mean, we don't do things that we're not running nuclear plants. we're not firemen. We need to be the adults in the room for a large gathering of people. That's really what we're doing, and we're putting in good plans so that people can have fun. On the extraordinarily rare times when something really goes sideways, there's a team of people to back you up and help you with it. So as long as you're planning well, being mindful about what's happening, that's what's important. And yeah, that's why I don't talk about it too much, because it really was just from outer space weird.
And I think that's a good reminder as well, to remember sometimes as an event steward, it can feel like you're where the buck stops, but the buck stops with many other people after you. So there's the seneschal, which is your legal representative. There's the exchequer, which is your legal money person. Even your baron and baroness, the prince and princess, depending, or king and queen, depending which level you're at. With the event, those are all people who handle things on the ground as well. We talk about the fact that the baron and baroness and the other coronets and crowns, we're cheerleaders, but we are also, I don't want to say personnel managers, we are diplomats, and we are the people who are there to handle difficult situations that the event steward doesn't necessarily have to take care of. The event steward can go and find the seneschal and say, hey, I'm having this situation. I can't deal with this. This isn't something that's within my purview, or I can't handle this for various reasons. Can you take it? And the answer is yes. There is an entire team of at least 4 other people that are on the ground at that time that should be able to help you out.
You are literally never on your own as an event steward.
Yeah.
There is always a team of people there to back you up and to help you. Any other questions? All right. You guys are a quiet lot.
Not always.
I'm a little surprised.
We've gotten some practice at behaving ourselves on these videos.
Yeah, Rafe, it was Bargamel's. I think Rafe was there. Rafe and Adele were there, yeah.
It happens. In fact, my first Bargamells was an interesting Bargamells as well. I wasn't even the event steward. So, I mean, Bargamells is always a fun and fascinating event.
I love Bargamells. It was one of my very first events. It was part of why I wanted to run it, because I went to my first Bargamells when I was like 13. So when I was old enough to run it, that was the first thing I put a bid in for.
Yeah, it's we enjoy it.
All right.
Yeah, if there are other questions, Your Excellency, would it be okay for us to perhaps forward them to you and okay, so there you go.
Absolutely.
All
And you
right.
have the link to the documents.
Mhm.
And inside of those, and my email is at the beginning of all of them, so that you can send me any corrections, updates, suggestions, anything like that. So my email's in there and you can get a hold of me that way. And I'm always happy to answer questions or talk through event steward stuff, because it really is my favorite thing to do.
Excellent.
All right.
I know that we very much appreciate you joining us this evening and for giving us such a wonderful class. I'm sorry that you had to condense it like that. I know it's really difficult to do, and we appreciate that you took the time for us.
I am more than happy to. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you,
All right.
yeah. Thank you,
If anybody
Vivien.
has any other questions, I'll jump off then.
All right.
Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. You as well.